Rethinking the church service paradigm. A paradigm is a model of something, and in this session we are going to rethink the paradigm of the church service. Today, when we think about a church service, we find a common paradigm, a common model for almost every service. Regardless of the church's theology, their style, or their movement, or their denominational connection, most churches have the same paradigm. They run to a similar pattern, and that pattern normally consists of things like music and song. It's called praise and worship. Offering, this is your chance to give financially to the church, and in some churches to pay a tithe. Sermon or preaching, this is your chance to receive the word of the Lord from the appointed leader. Then there's also other parts of the paradigm that may vary from church to church. One such would be communion. The consuming of the bread or the biscuit or the wine or the grape juice. It's also known as a sacrament. Its frequency may vary in different churches, but in general most churches take it at some stage as part of the church service, as part of the church paradigm. And one of the biggest mistakes made by people desiring for a home church, a simple church, or an organic church, is to try and duplicate the established church paradigm for their gatherings. So what do I mean by this? I mean, some people attempt to start a home church and they think they need to have songs, sermon and offering. They want the same paradigm as the larger church, but they want to shrink that down to fit inside their lounge room. And this is a mistake. And as we clear our minds and rethink the paradigm of church, rethink the pattern of church, and compare this paradigm, this pattern with the New Testament, we will see that there's a whole other way that church can be church. One of the very early questions I asked was, what can we take away from this common pattern, the common paradigm of church, and it still be called church? Can it be church without music and song, or praise and worship? Can it be church without the offering or the tithe being collected? Can it be church without preaching the message or the sermon? Can it be church without communion or the Lord's Supper? So when we look at the New Testament paradigm of church, probably the place to start is the book of Acts. And what we find in the book of Acts is a paradigm of church that we very rarely see today. And it's a paradigm that doesn't consist of songs, sermon, or offering. And we find it in Acts chapter 2. I'm going to start reading at verse 42. They were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone kept feeling a sense of awe, and many wonders and signs were taking place through the apostles. And all those who had believed were together and had all things in common. And they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing them with all as anyone might have need. Day by day, continuing with one mind in the temple and breaking bread house to house, they were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. We find in this scripture that the early church was devoted to the apostles' teaching, fellowship, breaking of bread, and prayer. But it actually goes on. It says they also sold their property and shared it with anyone that had need. They met daily with one mind. That's great unity. There wasn't these denominational differences. They went to the temple, which was the religious building of the day, but every day they met in houses, having meals together, which was the breaking of the bread. What we find in the book of Acts is a paradigm rarely seen in any church today. A model of church that meets daily, shares meals with each other, and where people would sell their own property to help those in need. It is much more like a family and not a formalized gathering. It was a paradigm that promoted care, welfare, and authentic relationship rather than the entertainment and the show style that we see in most churches today. As we explore the paradigm of the New Testament church today, we also need to look at what Paul said in the book of Corinthians. Paul gave some guidelines to gatherings in Corinth. And we find these guidelines spread across 3 chapters of the book of 1 Corinthians. Chapter 12, chapter 13, and chapter 14. And I don't believe it's any coincidence that chapter 13 is right in the middle of Paul giving instructions to the early church at Corinth. What is chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians? That's known as the love chapter. Because I believe without love, we don't have church. We don't have proper fellowship without the love for each other. But let's explore what Paul said in 1 Corinthians. What we find here is that Paul addresses the issue of using spiritual gifts during gatherings. And Paul seems to put an emphasis on the gift of speaking in tongues without an interpretation. And he says, if you're doing this, stop. Don't give a gift of tongues without interpretation. Now, why would he say that? We'll discover that as we go on in this session. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 26, Paul gives the outcome of everything he was saying for the 3 chapters, chapter 12, chapter 13, and chapter 14. And he says this, "What is the outcome then, brethren? When you assemble, each one has a psalm, has a teaching, has a revelation, has a tongue, has an interpretation. Let all things be done for edification." Now some people might say, see, it talks about bringing your psalm. That talks about songs in church. And yes, it does, but it's not talking about having a music team and someone and this team leading everyone in song. It's talking about anyone can bring a psalm and share. Anyone can bring a teaching and share. Anyone can bring a revelation, a tongue, and share, providing the tongue's got an interpretation. Paul indicates a couple of things here about the paradigm of church. Firstly, the paradigm of church needs to be for the edification of each other. Now that should really change how we think about church. See, some would say we go to church so we can praise and worship God together. We can have this corporate praise and worship. Yet Paul was saying when you gather, gather for the edification of each other. So that each person there can be edified and encouraged. He says, let all things be done for edification. And this is why Paul addresses speaking in tongues without an interpretation. Because it doesn't edify the one who hears it. And Paul is saying, let everything be done for the edification of the other person. Another paradigm that Paul highlights in Corinthians for the church is the everyone involved. Each person involvement. Each person can bring something, a psalm, a teaching, a revelation. Each person can share something for the purpose of edification of the others around. It is ministry by the whole body, not a one-man show. And it's ministry for the purpose of edifying each other. As we read chapters 12, 13 and 14 of 1 Corinthians, we soon discover that the church gathering was not a performance with a music team, nor was it a one-man sermon, but it was a gathering where all could participate for the purpose of edifying each other. And any church model, any church paradigm should have a purpose that is the same. For the edification and encouragement of each other. So can it be church without songs, sermon and offering? Very much so. If there is a gathering of disciples encouraging and edifying each other, it is church. That may happen around a meal table. It could happen in a cafe, at a park, at a playground. It could happen on a camping trip, a fishing trip, or a shopping trip. And this is what I love about organic church. It can and does happen anywhere, at any place, any time. Any time where disciples have gathered and where there is mutual edification. So if you're seeking more of an authentic style of church where people gather with the biblical purpose of church, and that biblical purpose being serving and encouraging each other in their walk with the Lord, then be prepared to look outside the normal church, the traditional church paradigm of songs, offering and sermon. And if you're wondering where to start with an authentic, organic style of church, you could start simply by inviting a few people around for a meal, or for supper, or a fishing trip, whatever they and you may be interested in. And use that time to encourage each other in following Jesus. And just as Paul summed up the chapters in Corinthians with an outcome, I want to sum up this session with an outcome. And the outcome of this session is that you don't need songs, offering, or a sermon for it to be called church. You simply need some other believers, some other disciples to gather with. And over that gathering, encourage and edify each other. If it doesn't look like traditional church or established church, and if some may not even call it or consider it as church, you know what? That is okay. As when God sees the gathering of his people, he sees true ecclesia. And for those that may have missed the previous session, ecclesia is the original Greek word translated church. Think about it. God bless.